fear is not a disease of the body, but of the mind. Baruch Spinoza. Spinoza believed that fear is not some external force that controls us, but a mental state that can be understood and transformed through reason. He argued that true freedom doesn't come from avoiding fear, but from understanding its nature. By using the power of rational thought, we can untangle ourselves from the grip of anxiety and reclaim control over our minds. Instead of letting fear dictate our lives, we can learn to observe it, question it, and ultimately free ourselves from it. Spinoza's approach to life and emotions offers an incredibly rational and insightful way to confront fear and anxiety. At the heart of Spinoza's philosophy is the idea that emotions, including fear and anxiety, are not just random forces that we are helpless against. Instead, they are part of the natural order of the world, and by understanding them through reason, we can regain control over them. Spinoza's teachings revolve around the idea of accepting reality as it is, and using reason to navigate our emotional responses. By observing our emotions without judgment, we can free ourselves from the cycle of unnecessary suffering that fear and anxiety often cause. This approach allows us to see that fear is not a sign of weakness or failure, but simply a natural emotional response that can be understood and managed with clarity and calmness. In this video, we will explore how Spinoza's philosophy can help us overcome anxiety and fear by using rational thinking, observing our emotions without judgment, and accepting reality as it is. We will discuss practical steps you can take to apply these teachings in your daily life and break free from the mental suffering that anxiety and fear can cause. Spinoza's philosophy is not just a theory. It's a tool that, when applied, can lead to true inner freedom and a more peaceful, balanced life. Let's dive deeper into how you can start using Spinoza's teachings today to manage your emotions and create a life with less fear and more peace. One of the key aspects of Spinoza's philosophy is his view on emotions. In Spinoza's worldview, emotions are not random or uncontrollable forces. Instead, they are natural processes that arise from the interactions between the body and the world around us. This view challenges the common perception that emotions are something external to us that we can't understand or influence. For Spinoza, emotions are part of the natural order, and they are shaped by our experiences and the ideas we have about the world. Spinoza teaches that emotions arise from two basic sources, the body and the mind. Our physical sensations, such as pain or pleasure, influence our emotional state. For example, if we experience a physical injury, we feel pain, and that pain creates an emotional response. Similarly, our thoughts and beliefs about the world shape how we react emotionally. When we fear something, it's often because we have formed an idea that something bad might happen in the future, even if that event has not yet occurred. Spinoza doesn't see emotions as inherently good or bad. Instead, they are simply reactions to our experiences and thoughts. For instance, anxiety is not an evil feeling, but a reaction to the idea that something uncertain or harmful might happen. In the same way, fear is a natural response to the idea of danger. What makes these emotions challenging is not their existence, but the way we react to them. Often we become entangled in these emotions, believing that they are uncontrollable or that we should feel guilty for having them. But for Spinoza, understanding emotions is the first step toward overcoming them. Emotions are not disturbances of the mind, but rather part of the natural process that we can understand and, through understanding, influence, Spinoza argues. By recognizing that emotions are part of the natural world, we can begin to see them as temporary states that we can manage, rather than as overwhelming forces that control us. This shift in perspective allows us to approach fear and anxiety with a calm, rational mind, rather than being swept away by them. In practical terms, this means that when you feel anxious or fearful, rather than resisting or judging these emotions, try to understand them. Ask yourself, what triggered this emotion? What thoughts or beliefs are behind it? By identifying the source of the emotion, you can start to separate it from your identity and begin to manage it with reason and clarity. For example, if you feel anxiety about an upcoming event, instead of allowing that anxiety to take over, you can ask yourself, what am I afraid will happen? Is that fear based on reality, or is it a worst-case scenario I've created in my mind? By recognizing that your fear is tied to your thoughts, you can start to rationally assess the situation and realize that much of the anxiety you feel may not be based on actual threats. Spinoza's philosophy emphasizes the power of rational thinking in managing emotions. Fear and anxiety often arise when we believe that something will happen in the future, or when we imagine that we are in danger. However, Spinoza argues that fear is often a product of our imagination rather than reality. Fear arises from our imagination, from what we think might happen, not from reality itself. This statement is key to understanding how rational thinking can help us overcome fear. Our minds often create worst-case scenarios that may never come to pass. These imagined fears are not based on objective reality, but on our assumptions and projections about what might happen. When we rely on our emotions to guide us, we often make decisions based on these imagined fears, which can prevent us from living a calm and peaceful life. Rational thinking, on the other hand, allows us to separate our emotional reactions from reality, helping us to assess situations more clearly and respond in a way that is aligned with the truth. Spinoza encourages us to approach fear and anxiety with reason and objectivity. When faced with a fearful situation, instead of reacting with panic or avoidance, we should stop and examine the situation rationally. What is the actual risk? What evidence do I have that this fear is justified? By asking these questions, we can start to see that much of our fear is disproportionate to the reality of the situation. Spinoza's teachings urge us to trust in reason as a way to break free from the grip of fear and anxiety. To apply this in everyday life, take a moment when you feel fearful and examine the situation from a rational perspective. For example, if you're anxious about a job interview, instead of focusing on the fear of failure, ask yourself, what is the worst that can happen? Even if things don't go as planned, will I be able to learn from the experience? By reframing the situation in a rational way, you can reduce the emotional intensity of fear and approach the situation with greater clarity and confidence. Another central teaching of Spinoza's philosophy is the idea of observing emotions without judgment. This is a powerful way to detach from the grip of fear and anxiety. In our society, we are often taught to view emotions as either good or bad. We judge ourselves for feeling anxious or fearful, thinking that these emotions make us weak or inadequate. But Spinoza challenges this view, arguing that emotions are simply natural responses to our environment and experiences. Rather than judging them, we should observe them with neutrality. We are not disturbed by things, but by the views we take of them. Spinoza famously said. This quote speaks to the idea that it is not the event itself that causes our emotional reactions, but the way we interpret or view the event. By observing our emotions without attaching judgment or labeling them as good or bad, we create space between ourselves and our emotional reactions. This allows us to respond to emotions with more clarity and understanding. When we judge our emotions, we create a cycle of guilt and shame that only deepens the suffering. If you feel anxious, for example, and then judge yourself for feeling that way, you are layering an additional negative emotion on top of the original anxiety. This can cause the anxiety to spiral, making it more difficult to break free from. Instead of reacting with judgment, Spinoza teaches us to simply observe the emotion and recognize it as part of the natural process. To put this into practice, the next time you feel anxious or fearful, try to simply observe the emotion without labeling it as bad. Acknowledge it and say to yourself, "This is just an emotion, not who I am." By separating yourself from the emotion and observing it without judgment, you can break free from its grip and regain control over how you respond. Perhaps the most transformative aspect of Spinoza's philosophy is his emphasis on accepting reality as it is. Anxiety and fear often arise when we resist the way things are, wishing that they were different or that we could control the outcome. Spinoza teaches that this resistance only causes more suffering. Happiness is not the reward of virtue, but virtue itself. Not the fruit of an action, but the action itself. In other words, true peace comes not from controlling the world around us, but from accepting it as it is. Many of our fears stem from our attempts to control every outcome. We fear uncertainty, change, or the possibility of things not going as planned. But Spinoza argues that the more we accept the world as it is, impermanent, uncertain, and beyond our control, the less anxiety we will feel. Acceptance doesn't mean giving up or resigning ourselves to passivity. Instead, it means acknowledging that we cannot control everything, and that's okay. By embracing this acceptance, we reduce the mental suffering that comes from resisting what is. To apply this principle in your life, start by accepting the small things you cannot change. For example, if you're feeling anxious about an unpredictable situation, instead of trying to control it or resist the uncertainty, practice saying to yourself, "This is how things are right now, and I accept that." By doing so, you release the tension and fear that often accompany resistance. Spinoza believed that knowledge is the path to freedom. The more we understand our emotions, our thoughts, and the world around us, the more control we gain over our reactions. Knowledge helps us understand the causes of our emotions, making it easier to manage them. The more we understand, the less we are controlled by external forces. In other words, when we know ourselves and the world better, we stop being at the mercy of our fears and anxieties. Self-awareness plays a huge role in emotional management. When we become aware of our thoughts and emotions, we can separate ourselves from them and make rational decisions. This awareness allows us to understand why we feel the way we do, and how to respond in a more balanced way. The more we observe our emotional triggers and reactions, the less likely we are to be overwhelmed by fear and anxiety. A practical step to develop self-awareness is journaling. When you feel anxious or fearful, write down what you're feeling, what triggered it, and what thoughts are accompanying the emotion. This practice helps you observe the emotion objectively, so it doesn't control you. Over time, this increased self-awareness will allow you to identify patterns in your emotional responses and give you the tools to respond with greater wisdom and clarity. By incorporating Spinoza's rational philosophy into our daily lives, we can transform our relationship with fear and anxiety. By understanding that emotions are part of the natural order, using reason to navigate them, observing them without judgment, and accepting reality as it is, we can break free from the cycle of suffering that anxiety and fear often create. Spinoza's teachings offer a practical roadmap for living a life with less fear and more peace, and these principles can be applied by anyone, regardless of their background or life circumstances. The next time you feel overwhelmed by fear or anxiety, try applying Spinoza's approach. Take a moment to observe the emotion without judgment, understand its source, and accept the reality of the situation. With practice, you will find that your fears lose their power, and you will gain the freedom to live with more peace, clarity, and confidence.